Okay, guys, so it's Mitch here from Century 21 in Peterborough, and we're very lucky to have Michelle Ferreri here with us today. Many of you who are watching my channel probably are already very familiar with Michelle's face. She's a big presence in Peterborough, and the reason we've gotten together today is to talk about a number of things, but most importantly is that Michelle is seeking the nomination for the Conservative candidate position for a pending federal election. And that's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and a lot of the audience that watches any of my stuff real estate related is going to find what Michelle has to say very relevant as well, because everything that's going on with our housing market is very interlinked with what's happening with federal politics. And I think there's going to be some changes pending, and there's a lot of things that people aren't necessarily happy with. So very happy to have you here today.
Thanks, Mitch. I'm really excited to be here. And first off, you're the people that matter, because if we don't get involved and vote and execute our right to vote and learn and make informed decisions, nothing changes if nothing changes. So you're not allowed to complain unless you do something, and you're doing something, regardless of what political party you align with. So.
For sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I couldn't agree more that it's action moving forward, and I think education. So I want to talk to people and sort of, we'll take it back first, and before we dive into all the real estate stuff, let's talk about your story and why you're doing this.
Isn't that $1 million question? Yeah, I think, so for those of you who know what I do, I run a sort of social media marketing business. It's like lots of different facets within it, whether it's coaching, professional speaking, emceeing, hosting. My background, obviously I worked at the time, it was called Checks, it's now Global. I worked there for 12 years. Then I worked for a company called Lumix. Started my own business, wanted a bit more freedom, right? Mom of 3 at the time, just trying to juggle it all. And so I did that, and I've been a community advocate. I'm in my 6th year of business now, my 6th year, and really try to advocate for people, organizations, bringing the community together and talking about topics that aren't always easy to talk about. So mental health obviously is probably my biggest topic, and I think it impacts everybody. So having those tough conversations, I think we don't know what we don't know. And I think to undo a lot of what we think we know, we have to open up conversations. So the best way I describe what I do is I'm a storyteller, which I think sounds really juvenile, but I actually think it's one of the most powerful methods to connect with people. And I think it's an age-old skill, and I think it's really important. So, I started that and was really fortunate to grow a business and to make a living on my own, doing this social media marketing, and always been actively involved in politics. So always been a major advocate to get out and vote. That's my biggest, I will tell people over and over again, it doesn't matter who obviously I want you to vote Conservative, but really at the end of the day, it's really about getting involved. And I think that's so important, and listening and working in the media for as long as I did. You have to do your own work. You have to do your own homework. So my friend Mike Skinner had run the past 2 elections federally, and helped him kind of behind the scenes. And he chose not to run again. And it sort of came to me very quickly. This wasn't in my long-term plan. Most of my business in my life actually hasn't been a long-term plan. It's been sort of reacting to the environment. And my parents actually phoned me up one day and said, Michelle, I think you should run. And I said, I don't think so. Thanks. I already get enough comments online and enough. I said, no, I'm not really into that. So then another person phoned me, and another person, and I was like,
was your parents behind any of that, or was it just organically kind of?
Know.
Yeah.
And my partner Ryan Moore, he's been really politically involved for a long time, and he actually sought the nomination provincially. So I said, why don't you run, and I'll come out and help you. So because you have to be nonpartisan, right? I've had to maintain nonpartisanships as a media person. And I think that's actually one of the reasons that you're able to decide which party you lean to, because you get that whole gamut. As a journalist, you have to look at all sides of the story. So anyway, so he was like, Michelle, you need to run. And I was like, are you crazy? Like, I'm going to stick my neck even further out than I already do on a daily basis. And I said, I just, no. And one of the things, like, I said, politics is great if you get rid of the politics. So that's one of my sayings, right?
Yeah.
And so I just wasn't there. But anyway, as you can tell, I did decide to do it. I started to think about it more. My brother was a major influence. So my brother's I joke, I call him the Vulcan. Like, he's very pragmatic. Paul Leahy, big shout out to my brother who does excavating. And he said, Michelle, I really think this is something you could do well at. He said, you're a communicator and you connect with people. And he said, I think you should run. So I made the decision to put my name in the hat. Obviously, I had a big conversation with my kids. I had a big conversation with my ex-husband. Everybody, right? Everybody has to be on board because it does impact everybody. And so then I decided to put my name in the hat, and that was in February of 2021. And actually, when we record this interview, ironically, on the way here, so it's I think it's August. No, it's not August yet.
Is it July
28th? I don't even know what date it is.
Yeah.
I just got word that I've been officially greenlit. So that means that I'm approved. So now comes the next part where I get voted by members within the party. So it's an election before the election, and then we'll see what happens after that.
For sure. At this point, we talked about it last week, the membership, the ability to obtain a new membership and have a say within the riding is closed out, correct? Like
it is. So you had until midnight last Friday. So basically you have to be a member within the organization of the Peterborough Kawartha riding to vote for your candidate.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll see within a couple of weeks if you have the opportunity to represent the people. And then from there, there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of securing the nomination for the riding itself in terms of the federal election.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that a bit, and I'll speak to the topics that some of my audience might want to hear first, and I think it's all relevant, so we can get into other stuff for any of the locals. It's all good, but let's talk about real estate and housing.
Love real estate,
because it's really, that is what spurred my fascination with economics, is having the family business growing up and seeing how much what happened in any given year was not totally within our control, and the swings of the housing market and really the ebbs and flows of the financial health of a country and the world was really dictated what happened to us as a business. And it took me by surprise in 2007, 2008, watching the subprime crisis and all the debt issues that unfolded there. And I just could not wrap my head around how nobody could make sense of what had happened with all of that debt and how the great tragedies that were happening with housing there. And so started to study it and realized that so much of what happens with people's well-being and welfare when it comes to housing and shelter is related to economics and government decisions. And so that being said, we're in a pretty precarious situation right now where the affordability of our own city has just totally deteriorated, within a number of, it was already bad last year, but from January until this point this year, it's totally, people have really lost hope in their ability to enter the housing market. And a lot of renters who are being displaced are totally overwhelmed when they have to re-enter the housing market with rental rates that have sometimes tripled in the span of a few years compared to their old leases that they were under. So I'm sure that's something that you're dealing with a lot. What do you see? What do you see when you talk to people about housing? What do people want to know, or what feeling are you getting from people?
People are angry.
Yeah.
Is a really short answer. I don't think we've ever had a political environment where it's directly impacted everyone's life like it does right now. So often politics is kind of esoteric, right? You're talking about foreign affairs and everyone's like, this is directly impacting every single person's life.
Housing is really,
And I would say that housing is probably the number one issue that we see, because what you're seeing is it's top down, right? So you have business owners who say to me, we don't need job creation. I can't get anyone to work for me.
Yep.
Okay. Well, then that comes back to a living wage. Well, what's the living wage so that we can make sure that people can pay rent? Well, rent is astronomical. Mortgages are astronomical. Houses are astronomical. This artificial market that's just kind of growing and growing. So if you can get a handle on the housing, you're going to get a handle on workers. You're going to get a handle on all of these other issues. You know, when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's shelter, food, right? So if you don't have that, or you are stressed about that, it's critical. So people, and then you have young people, like I think about myself. So I'm 42, Mitch. I bought my first house when I was 22.
Do you remember what you paid?
$155,000.
Did it seem affordable at the time?
No. It was like the most money I could imagine spending, right? I think we had $6,000 to put down. Like that's, and it was crazy, right? To try and find this. And so that seemed crazy. That same house, so that house was on Tower Hill. Love that little house. Just sold, I think, again, for $435,000.
Yeah. Wouldn't be a surprise for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So and I get it, right? Like you look at my parents' generation, they bought their first house for $7,000. Like, right? Blow your mind. So, you know, it's supposed to grow a little bit. But right now, you have a massive problem. You know this.
Wages have not grown proportionately.
No. And it's just kind of like, and the people who can afford it are coming from outside, scooping it all up. And it's so you have young adults who now are like, okay, I guess we better see if we can get a permit to build an addition onto our house. You've got people who are seniors who can't earn fixed incomes. And the definition of affordable housing really needs to be clarified. It really needs to be clarified, because I think the general public thinks what is it? I would love you to define it for people.
It's I truthfully don't know. I think it's a ratio of your debt, right? Is it 30% of the average income?
So if the average, it's 80% of what the average housing is. So but a lot of people. So say an apartment is $1,000. Affordable housing would be $800.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So a lot of people hear the term affordable housing. And they think it means lower income, people who are struggling. Not the case anymore.
Maybe 2 years ago, maybe a year ago.
It never meant that. It's never meant that. So the definitions of what affordable housing is versus geared to rent income housing, those are very important things that we need to be clarifying when we see a lot of, headlines of, this much money has been pumped into, millions of dollars has been pumped into affordable housing. Okay, but people still don't have a house. So obviously it's not working, right? So I think there's a lot that needs to be clarified around what that is. And the big thing I think that needs to happen, the private sector is a major and necessary bridge to help with any kind of crisis. And, for years, the federal government gave a lot of incentives to the private builders. I mean, you probably know a lot about this as well, but it's been sort of cut off too, right? So I think a lot of that needs to be issued again. So I think we need to have a lot more incentives. We need to be looking at the cost in our relationships, foreign affairs relationships. Why has lumber reached what it has, right? There's a lot of pieces involved when you look at small homes, tiny homes. Is that feasible to put on water and sewer? Are they built for 4 seasons? What are the permits needed?
It's more difficult in our climate for sure.
Does that need to be? It seems like a very simple fix. And I mean, you could easily compare it to wartime housing. Right? And it seems great, but we would also have to look at what the laws are to accommodate, because I think right now, you can only be 900 square feet before you can, there's all kinds of, now those are municipal issues, right? So you've got the municipal, you've got the provincial, and you've got the federal. But if all three of those tiers aren't working together with a national housing strategy, you've got a major problem.
For sure. Yeah, that appears to be, from an outsider's perspective looking in, part of the problem is the lack of accountability and communication, because it does ripple through all levels, is that when we are growing as a population, it's very hard to plan and track how many houses you're going to need. But it seems to me that up to this point, there hasn't been enough accountability that the amount of homes they project they're going to need are actually getting built. And obviously, as you know, as a conservative myself, I'm more of a libertarian economically, thinking that the free market will supply if it's able to do so. There's lots of builders in town that would love to be building flat out right now to supply and reap record profits. Why wouldn't they? But they just don't have the ability. So it's a matter of, I think, cutting a lot of red tape, getting out of the free market's way and letting them build. But I know that a lot of that has been jammed up on many pretenses, but one of them is densification and obviously conservation of greenlands, which no one, I think, can argue with nowadays. But what do you see in terms of cutting red tape and letting builders build, freeing up more lands for development? Do you think that's something that's realistic?
I think red tape is a really, again, another kind of like odd term. Like, I think it's like always there. I talked to a local builder one day about this, and he said it to me really well. He said, it's like the weather. It's like traffic. It's always going to be there. And you can control it to a certain extent. Where I think change really happens, and where red tape and rules really shift to help the people, is when you have people at the table willing to work together. I think it really comes down to relationships. I think you probably know this in business. Working with somebody who's easy to work with and flexible, things happen. Right? So I think when you have people of different, we have extreme polarization on the ground right now. I think you've probably witnessed this. A lot of people have probably witnessed this. You know, you're either on this team or you're on that team. We used to be able to function. I remember watching debates in the 70s and 60s, and politicians would kind of sit at the debate and go, you know, that's actually not a bad idea. But I think we could do
now
this.
It's, no, that's not my idea. It's a bad one.
I hate it.
Yeah.
And so I think that is crossed over into the people, right? So it's just like parenting.
Red versus
right?
blue.
But also it's like the leaders dictate how the people treat each other, right? A good leader unites people. A bad leader divides people. So I think if you have people who are like, you know, not flexible, or they're not willing to sit down and listen and negotiate, that's where red tape starts to really come into play. And I think you need to have genuine relationships with a common goal, right? And I always say both parties or multiple parties need to come to the table with their own ideas, but be willing to negotiate.
So when that is speaking specifically, would you view that as the federal government or yourself as an MP working with the municipality?
You have to.
Yeah.
You have to. Like every level. So like a lot of people will say to me, well, that's a provincial issue, Michelle. That's a provincial or a municipal issue. I said, that's fine. But we all have to work together, because if one hand isn't talking to the other hand, nothing gets done. And a decision here impacts a decision here. So we all have to be on the same page. And I think we all need to kind of say, okay, listen, here's the common plan or goal or vision for Peterborough Kawartha. This is what we need. This is what is possible. This is what we can do. This is what we can't do. How are we going to achieve this? We need more housing, and we need more housing, like affordable housing for 20 to 30. Like, how are you supposed to afford a first-time house that's valued at what, $740,000 right now? That's the app. What? Yeah,
it's a lot. I know. I think about it all the time, and it's one of two things has to happen. Is, well, I shouldn't say that. There's a few ways it could go. The price of houses has to go backwards or stop growing relative to incomes, and incomes need to grow. Incomes definitely need to grow, but home prices reversing isn't palatable for anybody, especially anybody who bought within the last year. So no policy that advocates for a flood of inventory or outright demand side issues where you're really slowing down things through interest rates and lending practices. Nobody wants them to go backwards. So the fact of the matter is that these prices, as ridiculous as they are right now, they can't go. This is what they are. And all it seems like we can do is slow the rate at which they increase so that incomes can catch up. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to go backward, right? So it's kind of like saying to somebody, you know, I want to start getting paid this, but oh yeah, you know what? We're gonna actually take your pay back. Like you don't
for sure.
You don't do that. So I think you're bang on, and I think you need to stall it really quickly. And but I also think you need to be getting more up. And the other thing, Mitch, is there's a ton of people in this community, and I don't have their permission to share their name, so I'm not going to share it. But they're building, you know, great affordable, like there's programs in place that are working. And so I think sometimes you don't always have to reinvent the wheel, you know? And so I think that has to come into play too. Like you have things like the Mount. It's an incredible program there of sustainability. There's a program called Homeward Bound out of Peterborough Housing where they're taking young single moms, they're putting them through education, getting them a job that can sustain their own home ownership or rental. So it's not getting people stuck in the system. You see what I mean? Like
what's the Mount, Michelle?
The Mount is based out of, you may have remembered, I don't know if you ever went to a Catholic school and you went up there.
Yeah.
And, do you remember the Mount of Sisters of St. Joseph?
Okay.
Up on Monaghan Road?
I'm not familiar with Sisters of St. Joseph on Monaghan.
You're just not a diehard Roman Catholic, Mitch.
No, I went to St. Pete's too, but no, that's...
And you don't know?
No.
So it was, if you look at their model, it's actually pretty incredible. So I actually have a meeting later today with the head of the board of directors. But what they've done is they've created sustainable housing at affordable, subsidized prices. But the money comes back in to help fund it, right? So it's like... There's things that are, now that's your lower socioeconomic, but it's also helping, giving people the opportunity. If you can't put food on the table and you can't pay your rent, you can't even do anything else. Like you're in such a stress mode. Like, so people need to have those basics. Again, Maslow's hierarchy of needs before we can move into anything else.
It's hard. It's a bit of a two-tier where you need more supply for the market generally to slow the appreciation if we're going to continue to grow
supply
through
is
immigration.
The hugest.
And it definitely like all the sort of supply side advocates. A lot of like the conventional conservative approach, right, is not so much for the building up of government programs as letting the free market do its thing, just the real conventional, I guess, hard right. But I guess at this point, it really is that we need both because, like we said, the prices can't come down. So the people that have been so far missed, the only way to go back and get them housing is through some sort of government money flowing that way,
but
right?
sometimes these aren't government funded at all. These are private things.
Oh wow, is that totally private?
So sometimes, like not-for-profits, sometimes get a trickle of money. But this is what I'm saying. So you look at private builders. It's the same kind of thing. They're the bridge that is needed to close that gap of demand, right? But they also need incentives from the federal government. So that's where we look at. It's not necessarily here, take all the money.
Cutting taxes.
But let's create the environment for you, open up the supply so that you can do your job and get things rolling. I think that's a really key way to look at it.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, definitely, I suppose, do you care to comment at all on how you think that differs from what a liberal perspective would be on the situation and how this view might be more practical?
I think conservatives always have a theory of how to operate. And a conservative I believe that it is not the government's job to manage everything.
For sure. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's really the critical piece. It is a conservative's role to create the environment for you to be the best version and have the most opportunity for you to do what's best for you. There's too much variation from person to person in this world to say, hey, this is what we're going to do. And I think that's where ideologies really mix. So when you look at conservatives, what we really believe is ideology is great on paper, right? Theory on paper, I could probably balance the budget now.
Yeah.
But that really doesn't account for humans
And
individualism. So I think what conservatives do that I align with as an entrepreneur and doing what I do for the way I operate, I don't want you to have your hand in my whole life. I want you to help me have the opportunity to do what's best for my family.
Yeah. It seems to me when I read some of the liberal literature that they seem to think that they can get themselves out of this totally by building it themselves, like using government money to build the housing. And I think historically that doesn't work when the government tries to do it all, like you said, and run it all a free market. There's tons of people ready to build. There's competition out there. They're going to drive prices down if you just let them build, as opposed to, don't worry, we got it, we'll build all the housing. And then it just inevitably, it doesn't work, right? That's all good stuff. So I appreciate your inputs on that. Hopefully people that are upset about the housing situation right now can find that message or receive it well, and see that the conservatives have hopefully use the word pragmatic, a pragmatic approach to supplying housing, as opposed to a proposition which doesn't get followed through with accountability, because affordability of housing was in the Liberals' platform in the last election, and the last I checked a couple of weeks ago, it was still on their website saying that they are a very pro affordable housing, and it's just so far from being executed on that I just don't know why no one calls them out on what they haven't performed on, because it seems that during election time the promises are there, the follow through doesn't come on key things, and then a new round of promises come, and there's the disconnect between. I think that people really need to be educated and know that if they're not going to vote conservative, they have to understand that everything that the other party might be saying might not necessarily happen. So, and that's my views, not yours, but that's
it's well said. Yeah. It's well said, Mitch. And I think what you have to do when you make informed decisions is people can tell you all kinds of words. I think you have to look if there's anything to back up those words.
Sure. What's the track record of performances?
And I think that's really critical. And I think that falls across every spectrum. And I think, we've put millions and millions into this, and it's like, well, it didn't work.
So that's it.
We're still here and worse off.
For sure.
And I think the real key solution from where I sit, Mitch, we have some incredible people in this riding that know what they are doing. Let's let them be in on the conversation, and let's talk about it. Because they want to build those houses. People need the houses. Let's sit at the table and have these conversations to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our people. It is the umbrella thing. If we do not have housing, if we cannot provide housing for people, everything else is going to be out of control. And that's evident when we look at I've never seen it. I've never seen our community the way that it is right now.
It segues me into the next question, because I agree with everything that you just mentioned there. And in terms of housing and all the other issues, because I know, like you said, mental health's very near and dear to you. It seems natural to think that there is a link between housing and mental health, because the amount of homelessness, and of course there's lots of headlines in our city, as with many others, about overdoses and basically the epidemic going on with several imported hard drugs. And I wonder, what do you see as solution? Everyone wants to know. It's a very complicated issue. What are the answers for that type of things? Or people who know people struggling with that addiction, mental health, homelessness in our city? How do you ever get people to rise up out of those situations?
We should be able to solve this in 3 minutes, don't you think? This is probably the most complex and and
Yeah, so I know that was a big loaded question.
No, but
so,
it's the most complex, and it's also one of the most important things. And I went to school with a girl, and she lives on the streets now. And I was downtown Peterborough. I was eating at Freshie, which Freshie is like one of my favorite places to eat. And it was before things were open, so I was eating in my car. And she came and she knocked on the window. I didn't even recognize her. We had a really powerful conversation, and she had been clean. She'd struggled with drugs a little bit, but she'd actually gotten herself off drugs, but still nowhere to live. And I said to her, I said, what do you need? Like, she goes, the houses or the units to go and stay in are so full of drugs that I don't feel safe.
It's not a rehab environment.
It's not safe, right? And there's, there's knives, there's weapons, there's these kinds of things. And I said, can I bring you some clothes? Because I'm thinking, like little things. And she said, Michelle, I have nowhere to put them. And I think, that's a small statement, but a powerful statement. And there's a show called New Amsterdam. Have you ever watched it?
No.
Okay. Great show. And it's about this doctor who comes in, and he works in like the only publicly funded hospital in New York. Okay. New Amsterdam. And so what they have in the emergency room is they have these repeat customers. Okay. So homeless people, they come in. And so you can imagine how much money that's tying up into the system.
I know that firsthand very well from people who work security at the hospital.
So it's like they come in, they turn them out. So this one gentleman kept coming in on the show. I mean, it's a show, so take it with a grain of salt. But he was homeless. And so this medical director, Max is his name, says, okay, he does the numbers and he says, what's the price it's going to cost for us to get this guy an apartment? Okay. So versus him coming in, what are we spending?
What's the
okay?
cost? Yep.
So it was actually, they were saving millions of dollars by getting this guy an apartment. So they go out, he gets this, it's a show again, like whatever. So they go out and they get him an apartment.
Yep.
And they're like, we just solved this problem, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
The next day he was back in the emergency room.
Okay.
The reason I'm telling you this is it's not just housing, it's complex.
Yeah.
And what he needed connection with people. He needed purpose.
Reminds me of Shawshank Redemption, the movie. It reminds
he needed
me.
so much more. And so often what you'll see in a lot of parties, organizations, politics is throwing money at a problem. It doesn't work. Money doesn't solve things. Strategies work. Money with plans work. Education, networking, there's a 12-step process when you look at AA. And they believe that if you don't conquer number 12, the rest of it doesn't matter. And number 12, step number 12 is that you have to be a sponsor to someone else.
Right. That network, the accountability, and sort of a chain
So you
effect.
have to be a part of the solution. The problem is often the solution, right? So there's a lot of complexities in it, but most of it really starts at the kitchen table with your kids and teaching empathy and helping your neighbor. It's these little tiny acts that make a huge change. And I think people don't like that answer because I think they want it to say, here, just do this. But it's so complex. Like you have each organization that's doing these little tiny things that make powerful impact. There's so many women I've interviewed that use the Crossroads shelter. They were products of domestic abuse, but they are now on their feet doing amazing things because of programs like that. But it's the community. Like it's access to so many programs. And so I think when you look at mental health and all of this, it's very, very complicated. And I think you have to have a reactive, like in the media, like we have a fire burning right now. What do we do at this moment right now to help these people? Well, first of all, there's nowhere to go. Mental health is living on our streets. If you've walked downtown Peterborough anytime recently, it's probably the worst you've ever seen in your life. It's living on the streets. There's nowhere for them to go. And then from there, you need to make sure that free will has to come into play. It's very complex, and you have to have people who care, and you have to be supporting people who care, and you have to be working together as a team. Again, it's it's kind of the same answer for everything, where each tier, federal, provincial, and municipal, have to work together with a common goal, and they have to be willing to listen to the people at the table who are on the ground, those frontline people who see it.
Does because I don't know the answer whatsoever to this. Does the Conservative Party, to your awareness, have any kind of plan to any of those effects, like, or that you're aware of, or if not, if you would care to speak on what you personally see as your role going forward as a potential MP, or what you would hope to bring to Ottawa in terms of any of those particular issues?
When Aaron O'Toole, who's the leader of the federal Conservatives, came out with his 5-step plan, I sat there like, oh boy, I hope this is going to be something I like, because I had to put my name in, right? And it was at the convention, and his number 3 of his 5-step plan was secure mental health. And it was the first time I'd really heard a Conservative
it's not typically
say
a Conservative issue
out loud. So I feel really motivated that we finally are getting a handle on how critical mental health is and what it is. And like without health in general, and physical and mental health do not separate, nothing else can be done. You can't go to work. You can't care for your kids. You can't be a good partner. You can't be a good employee. You can't do anything. So what are we doing in terms of education when they're young, in those first critical 10 years of life, to ensure that we are, my kid's amazing. My kid will come home and tell me about the prefrontal cortex.
How old's your kid again?
My youngest, he's going to be 12. They know more about mental health. It's not, and that's what we need. They will be so much better than us, Mitch, because they won't have that stigma. And it'll be a free conversation. It'll just be like, I broke my arm. I'm struggling.
Sure.
I got bipolar. Okay, let's go fix that organ, right? This is just another organ. So I think for me, it is something that is the most important thing, and I've been a huge advocate of this for my 22 years in journalism for sure. But if people don't know what they don't know, and so you have to really. So
it's it could be viewed as a social issue in some aspects, just like
it's a huge economical issue.
That's for sure. Because I was going to say, like, there's many, traditionally speaking, going back into history, like the Conservatives have been sometimes the flack that the party would take would be over being socially conservative on issues such as marriage rights and such, but there's actually...
Don't you find that a really confusing term, socially conservative?
It's talked... I lived out west for a period of time, and I heard it much more out there because...
but it sounds like you would be more like liberal, like when you say social conservative, right? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it took me a while to wrap my head around what I see people that they say. Yeah, they would say I'm fiscally conservative, but I'm socially liberal because they didn't like the Conservative Party stance on some of the social issues, but they like their way that they handle the economy, and so you have a divide there. And so I think that that's an issue that typically the Conservative Party probably wouldn't have tackled head on, but it's pretty prominent, like you said, in our culture right now. So I guess socially, the acceptance and the talking of it is one thing. Do you see actual dollars flowing into anything specifically?
I think it has to. And I think I've been attacked for saying this before, but I think you can't even have an economy. So it's actually a key component of fiscal responsibility to invest in mental health.
Yeah. I suppose at the base level.
If you can't show up to work. So I did a national conference on post-traumatic stress disorder, first responders, headed by the chief psychiatrist of the Canadian Forces. And the only way you can get companies at this time, when we did it, which was in 2015, was to show them the lost revenue of sick days. And as soon as you show them that, boom, now we're talking. And so it's like, listen, this is in your best interest to start paying attention to this. And what do you have in place for your workplace to ensure employee retention? It's the two biggest costs of running any company: wages and transaction fees. Those are the two biggest costs of running a business. Okay, if you can't retain your employees, or you have high employee turnover, or you can't get people to show up to work, it will destroy your business. It is in your best interest to invest in this. The return on investment is, I don't even know how you put a number on it.
For sure. So you see the Conservative Party making some actual motions in that direction. Yeah. Awesome. No, that's your passion shows when you speak about it. So and people know that you're authentic in that regard. So that's great. You know, our people, the city of Peterborough, definitely, you know, they need a voice there. And so I guess because we're probably, just to wrap it up, I'm sure we covered, I think we covered most of what I wanted to cover. And so I guess just for anybody watching, final message that you wanted to bring. I mean, in terms of what you want to say to people.
Yeah, I guess. First of all, I want to say thank you for having me, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I really did. Yeah. It is tough. I think people want specific answers, and I think change takes a really long time. I think change is, and I think if you run your own business, which I saw, and I'm a person that has zero patience. Like, I want things done yesterday, right? A lot of driven people do, and I think it does take a long time to change our trajectory, and it is these slow, tiny changes that add up to big, significant change. I believe in people before politics. I will always say that. And I think a good idea should be a good idea. And I think we have to get back to building on good ideas. And I think we have to get back to having discussions and negotiations, not talking.
Closed door communications.
We need to get back to... when people talk, we're listening, okay? We're not listening to react. And I think it's evident, and I think we're better than that. I think Canadians, I think we're better than that. And growing up in a huge family, the greatest gift I've been taught is tolerance. And you're gonna have all different walks of life in the world, and people are going to bring their baggage. I always have this visual metaphor. It's like a giant suitcase, and everybody brings it. Their perceptions, their own personal lived experience, and how they want to solve a solution. And I think we have to find the humanity with each, and we have to find common ground. That's why it's called the House of Commons.
Yeah, for sure.
We have to find common ground, and we have to get back to
open discourse,
real and Canadian ways, man. Like, we are good, kind people. We are not, and I'm not dissing my American friends. I have tons of them. They're great, but we're not that divided. But we're acting like we are.
Yeah, well put. I agree. You just don't want it to be totally red versus blue. There has to be communication. Whatever way this thing goes, people need to all speak. You just, and I think that it sounds like you feel confidently that you represent everybody, and I think that's very important.
What's an MP's job, Mitch?
Represent all the people.
At the end of the day.
At the end of the day, represent the people, all the people, and especially the people of there riding a Peterborough. I think you're probably uniquely qualified to do that. So that's, that's what I see as your biggest strong suit going forward, is that you probably know more people in this town than just about anybody. So I think that when you talk about the issues that are not your issues or the party's issues, you're talking, these are the people's concerns, because you know who they are.
And they usually always want the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, people want more housing. Like, we want the same thing, but sometimes somewhere along the line we got stuck in the weeds of fighting over petty stuff that stops us from achieving our goals. And yes, I think conservatism is the best, practice. That's where I align myself. But a good idea is also a good idea.
Exactly. So I know what you mean. So if something from another party came across, you thought it was the right thing, you'd support it just the same if you thought it was the right idea.
It usually needs tweaking, right? Like, and I think that's really it. Like, I think the way a policy is written, and they're written, it sometimes just needs a little, okay, let's
little too
tweak,
far.
yeah, let's tweak
yeah.
that a little bit to make sure that we're not putting our hand too much into people's pockets. Because I think that always has to be your kind of governing principle. The government's job is not to manage everything. That's, you know, Hazel McCallion. I don't know if you ever followed her, Mitch. Oh,
no.
you're too. She was a mayor of Mississauga for like 100 years, man. She was just a
the name was just Hazel rings a bell there.
She's Hurricane Hazel, they called
yeah,
her.
exactly.
And,
yeah.
She knew how to unite the people, get it done, and be fiscally responsible, and just bring people together and do what was best for the community.
Yeah, good for you. Well, you know, we hope the best for you in the coming local nomination, and then onward, we'll see where it goes from there, and maybe we'll catch up again at some point if this election gets underway. And
yeah, you better be on my team.
For sure. I'll be knocking doors. So
thanks, Mitch. I really appreciate it. I really do.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks.
Take care, guys.